Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. In the previous episode, we followed the journey of Hoài Ca and Hùng, a journey that may seem simple on the surface, yet carries deep emotions and meaningful reflections. It wasn't just about the familiar image of a peaceful morning around a modest meal, but also about two people walking side by side through the smallest moments of daily life. From going out to the fields to harvest corn, clearing away wild grass, to the quiet times when they sat together, reflecting and sharing thoughts about the unfinished plans ahead. Despite unexpected difficulties, especially when they couldn't rent the land they had hoped for, what stood out most clearly in Hoài Ca and Hùng was their perseverance. They didn't let a single setback hold them back, nor did they allow obstacles to overshadow the dream they had been nurturing for so long. And then, as if it were a reward for their relentless effort, a ray of hope appeared. When Hùng brought Hoài Ca to a new piece of land, one he had quietly prepared in advance, it wasn't just another option, but a doorway opening toward a new direction, a new journey for their future. And in today's episode, that journey is no longer just an idea or a plan. It has officially begun, with slow but determined first steps. From the very first days setting foot on that new land, Hoài Ca and Hùng quickly realized that the road ahead would not be as smooth as they once hoped. The land, though wide and full of potential, still remained untouched and raw. Layers of dry, hardened soil cracked under time, showing signs of long neglect. Wild grass grew densely, tangled together and covering almost the entire surface, making even simple movement difficult. This place was not just a piece of land. It felt like a true challenge waiting for them. Yet what's remarkable is that Hoài Ca and Hùng did not see that challenge with hesitation. Instead, they embraced it from a completely different perspective. To them, the chaos before their eyes was not a barrier, but a starting point. A beginning that might be full of hardship, but also filled with opportunity, if only they were patient and determined enough to turn it into reality. And so, without any hesitation, they decided to begin with the smallest tasks. In the early mornings, when the sun had not yet fully risen and the air still carried traces of the night's mist, Hoài Ca and Hùng were already at the land. They made use of every short moment before work to check the leveling progress, carefully observing each corner, each area that needed attention. There was no rush, no carelessness. Everything was approached with patience and precision, as if every small detail carried its own meaning. Then came the evenings after work. While many people returned home to rest after a long day, for Hoài Ca and Hùng, another part of their journey continued. They changed into simple work clothes, carried their familiar tools, and returned to the land, now gradually becoming an inseparable part of their lives. One held a hoe, each firm strike breaking through the hardened soil beneath. The other carried a machete, patiently cutting away the thick, overgrown grass. There were no modern machines, no shortcuts. Everything was done with their own strength, endurance, and persistence. Little by little, they cleared the land. Little by little, they cut through the overgrowth. And little by little, they gathered what once seemed like endless piles of dry grass. Those piles, once scattered everywhere and making the land feel chaotic, were gradually collected and organized. Open spaces began to appear more clearly. The dry brown soil beneath slowly revealed itself, bringing with it a new feeling, a sense of change, of potential being awakened. Every corner that was cleared, every space that was opened up, was the result of tireless effort. There were moments of exhaustion, moments when their bodies felt completely drained, muscles aching as if they had nothing left to give. Sweat soaked through their clothes, dust clung to their faces. And yet, throughout it all, not a single complaint was spoken. Not because they didn't feel tired, but because they understood the meaning behind what they were doing. They simply looked at each other. Sometimes it was a glance of encouragement. Sometimes it was a quiet smile. Small things, but enough to remind them that they were not alone. That they were doing this together. Not for the present, but for a future they both believed in. And just like that, day after day passed. The land slowly changed. No longer the chaotic, untouched space it once was, but gradually becoming more organized, more defined. Under the hands of Hoài Ca and Hùng, every corner carried traces of effort, of time, and of belief. This was not a sudden transformation. It was a process of accumulation, where every small effort, every simple action, contributed to something greater over time. The journey is still long. There is still much to be done ahead. But with what they are doing now, perhaps what matters most is not how fast they will move forward, but rather that they have never stopped. And that, above all, is what gives true meaning to this entire journey. There were days when the sun rose early, its harsh light spreading across the land as if it wanted to burn everything in its path. The heat became so suffocating that even breathing felt heavier. Under that blazing sun, Hoài Ca and Hùng continued to work quietly, beads of sweat constantly rolling down their faces, soaking through their shirts. At times, even pausing for just a moment was enough for them to feel the exhaustion slowly creeping into every muscle. There were also days when the work stretched from morning until late afternoon, leaving their bodies with barely any strength left. Their arms and legs ached, and even the simplest movements became increasingly difficult. Yet, through all of those moments, not once did they complain. It wasn't because they didn't feel tired, but because, in their minds, every drop of sweat carried a clear meaning. Every strike of the hoe was not just about loosening the soil. Every step forward was not simply movement. Everything they did was slowly bringing them closer to the dream they had chosen together. And it was during those tireless days that something within them began to shift. They were no longer working with just physical effort, but also with careful planning and a clearer vision for the future ahead. They started setting aside time to sit together, not to rest, but to seriously think about how they would build this land. No longer vague ideas or fleeting thoughts, but concrete plans, carefully discussed and thought through in detail. They didn't rush into anything. They didn't let emotions decide for them. Instead, every step, every decision was made with thoughtful consideration. In their minds, the land before them began to take on a clearer shape. It was no longer just an empty space waiting to be cleared, but a place with structure, direction, and purpose. One area would be dedicated to raising chickens, the central focus of the model they were working toward. Another area would be used for storing feed, ensuring a stable and self-sufficient supply for the future. The livestock housing was also carefully planned, designed to suit the weather conditions and provide the best environment for the animals to grow. And alongside all of that, they set aside certain spaces for future expansion, preparing for the time when everything would become more stable and they could grow even further. All of these plans, though still only on paper, carried such clarity that both of them could feel the path ahead was no longer uncertain. They had chosen a clear direction: to build a chicken farm. A model that was not too far-fetched, not beyond their current abilities, but suitable for what they had and full of long-term potential if developed properly. They had thought about hiring additional workers to speed things up. But in the end, Hoài Ca and Hùng chose to do as much as they could on their own. Not because they didn't need help, but because they understood the value of every bit of money they had. To them, every expense needed to be considered. Every small saving today was not just a number. It was the foundation for stronger steps in the future. And so, instead of depending entirely on others, they chose to do things themselves, going through every process, even the smallest ones. That not only helped them save money, but also allowed them to understand the work, the land, and the journey they were on more deeply. And during those days, not everything revolved around hardship. There were gentle moments, simple, everyday moments, when they worked and talked at the same time. Hoài Ca, while still pulling weeds, would sometimes smile as she spoke about the future. She imagined a day when this land would no longer be wild and empty, but full of life. A place filled with the sounds of chickens, the familiar rhythm of a farm running steadily. Mornings would no longer feel rushed or heavy, but peaceful, listening to birds, breathing fresh air, and beginning a new day in a place they had built with their own hands. Those words were not distant dreams. They were a belief, growing stronger day by day. As for Hùng, there were moments when he would pause in the middle of his work and quietly look out across the wide land before him. His gaze was calm, but behind it was a strong and unwavering determination. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his words carried certainty. That one day, this place would not just be a simple farm. It would be the result of everything they had built together. A place that held every footprint, every drop of sweat. A place that preserved the days they had spent striving side by side. And also a place that marked a chapter of their journey, one that was not easy, but deeply meaningful. Those dreams, though still ahead, felt more real than ever. Not because they had already come true, but because every day, every task they completed was bringing those dreams closer to reality. From the smallest things, from the simplest work, everything was gradually connecting, forming a journey where every step, no matter how slow, always carried hope and belief. Day by day, that piece of land gradually drifted away from its original wild state, not through sudden or dramatic transformation, but through slow, quiet changes that were undeniably clear. At a glance, the difference might not be immediately noticeable. But if one looked closely, at each corner, each patch of ground that Hoài Ca and Hùng had worked on, it became evident that everything was steadily changing in a way they themselves could feel through their persistence. The wild grass that once grew densely, tangled without end, was no longer as thick as before. It slowly thinned out, retreating to make way for wider open spaces. Patches of dry brown soil began to reveal themselves, no longer hidden beneath layers of overgrown grass, but appearing clearly, like proof of days filled with relentless effort. Nothing came easily. Every piece of land that was cleared was the result of long hours of work. Every small change was tied to the endurance that Hoài Ca and Hùng had maintained together day after day. The ground no longer remained as uneven and rugged as it once was. The high and low areas were gradually leveled, step by step, forming a more stable surface, making it easier to move and continue working. Though there were still unfinished areas, still many places that needed further improvement, those gradual changes brought with them a very real feeling that this place was slowly transforming. No longer a piece of land forgotten by time, but a space gaining direction. A place with purpose. A place being brought to life through human effort. And amidst all those changes, the first fences began to appear. They were not solid or complete structures from the beginning, but simple markers. Each post was driven into the ground, each wire carefully stretched, everything done with patience and precision. There was no rushing, no carelessness, because to them, every small detail carried its own meaning. Those fences were not just boundaries. They were signs of a beginning, the first outlines of a long journey of building that still lay ahead. There was still so much to be done, so many parts left unfinished. But when they stood back and looked at everything that had changed, Hoài Ca and Hùng could clearly feel something growing within them. It was motivation. A kind of motivation that did not come from big achievements, nor from completion, but from the small things they could see every single day. Each cleaner patch of land, each clearer step forward, each new milestone taking shape. Those simple things, when accumulated over time, became the clearest proof of all their efforts. Not because the road ahead had become easier, but because they knew they were moving in the right direction. In the midst of life's busyness, under pressures that sometimes make people want to stop, what causes many to give up is not the hardship itself, but the feeling of not knowing where they are going. But for Hoài Ca and Hùng, that uncertainty no longer existed. They knew what they were doing. They understood the meaning behind every task. They knew where their path was leading, even if it was slow. And that clarity became the foundation that kept them moving forward, even when they were exhausted, even when they felt like they had no strength left. Not because they never felt worn out, not because they never thought about stopping, but because deep inside, they always carried a reason strong enough, a reason that would not allow them to give up. It was a dream not too distant, not too grand, but enough to keep them going every day. It was a future they were not waiting for, but building with their own hands, from the simplest things. And above all, it was because they had each other on that journey. No one had to walk alone. No one had to carry everything alone. Whenever they felt tired, all they needed was to look at each other to find the strength to continue. Whenever they faced difficulties, they didn't need many words. Just working side by side, moving forward together, was enough to overcome everything. That companionship made the journey far more meaningful. And it was also what made every effort worthwhile. A new journey had truly begun. No longer plans resting quietly in their thoughts. No longer ideas existing only in words, but a process gradually taking shape through their effort, their time, and their persistence. A dream was slowly forming. Slowly, but surely, step by step, yet filled with hope. Will that small farm grow as they have hoped? What challenges are still waiting ahead on the path they have chosen? Those questions are still there, without answers yet. And this journey is far from over. If you followed this far, thank you so much for taking the time to listen and walk alongside this story. If you felt something from the journey of Hoài Ca and Hùng, even just a little, don't forget to like the video to support the channel, leave a comment to share your thoughts, and subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. See you again in the next episode, where this journey will continue to be written, and what lies ahead will surely give us even more to look forward to.
Xin chào tất cả mọi người đã quay trở lại với kênh của mình nhé. Hôm nay thì mình vừa mới ngủ dậy. Mình vừa làm video xong và video này mình sẽ lên vào tối hôm nay về video của Hoài Ca nhé mọi người. Cảm ơn mọi người rất nhiều vì đã theo dõi video của mình. Bây giờ thì mình đang làm tiêu đề và ảnh thumbnail để một tí nữa là mình sẽ, sau khi đăng tải video lên là mình sẽ hoàn thành hết tất cả các bước và mình sẽ công chiếu vào lúc 7 giờ tối nay. Cảm ơn mọi người rất nhiều. Hẹn gặp lại mọi người trong những video sau.